So talking about Jupiter in Capricorn, join Saturn and Mars, that's quite a lot of energy. How exactly does it work? Jupiter is debilitated, but it's joined the ruler and an exalted planet. Find out exactly how this works. So Jupiter, Saturn, Mars in Capricorn. In particular, what does Jupiter in Capricorn hold in store in general, and as we look here in 2020 from the end of March until the end of June, we're going to have Jupiter in Capricorn with Saturn the entire time and then with Mars for part of the time. So first we have to understand that when Jupiter is in Capricorn, it's taking that inspired part of the mind that wants to be aligned with higher teachings, higher wisdom, and brings it into the sign of Capricorn, which is about restriction, inhibition, the pressure of time, things like solitude and the need to commit and concentrate our energy on things that are sort of difficult. So Capricorn, of course, is ruled by Saturn, and this shows our ability to persevere through difficulty. That's the greatness of Saturn, is we can persevere through stress and difficulty and ultimately reach our goal. So Capricorn is the emotional, psychological feeling of that, and the feeling and the emotional resolve to persevere. Because first, in order to persevere, we need to be able to emotionally handle the pressure. We need to handle the pressure emotionally. Because if we get crushed emotionally by all of the hard work ahead, then we've already lost the fight. We've already lost. If we're crushed by the burden of the task ahead of us, then we've already lost, because then we're going to give up. So this is really the nature of Capricorn and the nature of Saturn. Saturn gives us that resiliency and that capacity to persevere through difficulty and not give up more than anything. So again, and we feel that in the sign of Capricorn, it becomes a psychological, internal problem or challenge. Now, of course, Saturn also rules Aquarius, which is then the external manifestation. So you see, Capricorn comes before Aquarius. Once we can psychologically handle the tasks in front of us and psychologically manage those burdens, and then we can concentrate, then through Aquarius we create something bigger. We commit to something externally that's bigger and where everyone benefits and all of that. So when we put Jupiter in Capricorn, instead of it being the inspiring qualities of Sagittarius, because remember, Jupiter has just come from Sagittarius, where we're now looking for inspiration, finding good teachings, aligned with higher wisdom, however we define it. And this is the important part, because it doesn't mean it's actually real wisdom in Sagittarius. People think it's wise. We all think that we're following the teachings, that we have the truth, and that we're operating through higher wisdom. We can really see it manifest and take shape and take form in Capricorn. That's the difference. Sagittarius is the idea and the belief in the thing that we believe is worth being inspired by. But then it becomes real in Capricorn. Now we got to concentrate and focus and commit to those things that we believe. So this, in many ways, is how our false beliefs, or our sort of crappy beliefs, become revealed as being sort of crappy. Because we have all these beliefs, and then it goes into Capricorn. Now we need to commit and concentrate our energy on those beliefs, because now it's not just an abstraction. Now your religion or your beliefs are going to be tested, because you're going to have to deal with some difficulty and some stress. And in many ways, in Capricorn, we're facing our fears. And of course, the one fear is the fear of death. So everyone has a lot of beliefs until it's time to put them into practice. And then you see how much we are actually walking the talk and following the things that we believe and that we might be preaching. You hear people preach a whole lot of things, and that's very Jupiterian, Sagittarian. Well, how much are we putting into practice? That's very Capricorn. And this is also how we show ourselves that, you know what, I'm just running my mouth here. I'm not walking the talk. I have a lot of big ideas, but then when it comes right down to it, I'm just afraid of death, and I'm hoarding toilet paper, and I'm doing this and that. Like, where is all this love of humanity and hope and inspiration now that you have to actually practice it? Right? So this is how Capricorn brings Jupiter down to earth. And of course, those who study astrology even a little bit know that this is said to be the debilitated sign of Jupiter, and this is why. This is all it means. You don't want to make more out of it than it is. You know, unfortunately, we still, because there's a lot of teachers that don't talk about these things with nuance. Again, it's not like we say things that aren't accurate, but we just say, oh, it's bad, it's bad. Jupiter's bad in Capricorn. You know, that doesn't really add anything. You want to know what is the difficulty. The difficulty is Jupiter is the part of us that wants to be inspired. And Capricorn is the part of us that doesn't care if we're inspired or not. I don't care if you're inspired or not. If you want to survive, or if you want this thing that you want to survive, you need to work hard, concentrate your energy, commit to it, not give up just because it's difficult. I don't care what you think. I don't care what you believe. If you want this thing, you need to work hard for it. And it could be anything. It's not just survival of your life, it's survival of something. So any planets that are in Capricorn, like in a natal chart, whatever those planets rule as karakas or as indicators, as house rulers, in Capricorn, there's going to be this feeling that I have to work hard to allow this thing to survive, or I need to realize that it's not worth all of that effort and I need to let it go. So this is the greatness of Capricorn, of Saturn, is knowing what to concentrate on and what to let go of. Saturn not only compels us to concentrate, but it also compels us to let go of some things, because we only have so much time and energy. So these things, again, when you're talking about Jupiter going into Capricorn, this is the part that just doesn't really feel so good for Jupiter, because Jupiter is where we say, no, but I want all of it. I want to be inspired. I want to have that feeling of being connected. And you have to understand that the signs, the rashis, are really more than anything the way to look at it. They're how the planets feel to us. They're more like psychological environments for the planets. The planets are the powers, like the forces that make things happen. And then the signs are like a psychological environment. Like the environment of Sagittarius obviously is conducive to Jupiter's, because it's Jupiter's nature, because Jupiter's the ruler. And so it's a place of inspiration, and Jupiter's inspired. Well, then you go into Capricorn, it's like a place of hard work. You know, if you literally consider it like a place, you know, Sagittarius would literally be kind of like a church. That's like the Sagittarius place. And Jupiter is like the priest or the preacher. So the preacher feels good in the church. Capricorn is like maybe a factory. It's like a factory where you need to do all this stuff, work hard to produce a result at the end. All this stuff, you need to get it right. You need to concentrate on it. So how does the priest feel in the factory? He's kind of like, what do I do here? Preach about how to make the widget? It just kind of feels out of his element. So this is really how he doesn't really know what to do there. And instead, what winds up happening when the priest is in the factory is the priest winds up having to work in a factory. And he's like, but I'm a priest. I'm a preacher. I want to be inspiring. And it's like, look, you're in the factory now. This is where you are. So you're not just visiting. Now, again, when it's by transit, Jupiter's just visiting for a while. Then he goes back into Sagittarius. But then he's going to spend like next year, like in the factory. And while he's there, he's got to do some work. So all of that philosophies, all the philosophies that Jupiter has, is now going to have to be expressed in a work environment, a work-like environment, not in a environment of elation. Again, if you have it in your natal chart, that's all it means. It's like the priest is in the factory. And the priest can still do a lot of great stuff in the factory. In fact, it makes all of those big ideas very practical. Not only that, but you're with a lot of factory workers. You're not with a lot of, quote, spiritual people. Or maybe you feel very humbled. Those teachings become very humbled and they're put into practice. You can think of Jesus, mixing among the common folks. Or all great teachers, all great spiritual leaders, they're not highfalutin in that regard. They're very much with the suffering and the plight of common people. Saturn and Capricorn very much has to do with common people. Saturn is like the laborer, the worker, the common person. Common, it's not an insult, it just means that's their nature. Simple in the sense of not intellectual or complicated in that regard. It doesn't mean that they're not as spiritual or intelligent or wise. It just means that they're involved in, like the sort of labor kind of work and things that take labor and effort. Because it's only, Saturn, especially Capricorn, especially at first, is really a spiritual sign, one of the most. Because there's a heaviness to it, we face the heavy realities in life that most of us want to not pay attention to. Planets that are in Capricorn, whether it's Jupiter or any other planet, feel a little bit of the burden of life. They feel the pressure of life, like the sense that it's going to end at some point. It's like always there. So again, if it's like Venus in Capricorn, Venus, which is the karaka of relationships, always sense that, well, it might end one day, it might end one day. Now again, that can be heavy. It might not be so fun to always have that awareness. But what it does is it makes you very humble. It makes you very appreciative. You appreciate the other person because it feels like a gift, because it doesn't have to be here at all. I'm grateful that I have anything in this regard. So this is the greatness of Saturn, of Capricorn, and of Jupiter in Capricorn. The greatness is that we have to put our teachings into practice. We become humbled because people are very pious about their teachings. They can be very, frankly, quite vain and very dogmatic about the things that they believe. Mine are right, others are wrong. And Saturn and, Capricorn says, oh, really? Now, let's see you put them into practice. Let's see how inspired you stay when you have to work on an assembly line and you're just a commoner like everybody else. Again, the Jupiter part wants to be higher and more motivated, but that's actually putting the teachings into practice. So again, you want to notice all the time, and this dignity and this psychological feeling is hard to bear at times. It's a real thing, but it's not a death sentence. And in fact, it has a lot of power and a lot of capacity. And I will just tell you, some of the most authentically spiritual people I know actually have Jupiter in Capricorn because it's so humbling. Now, it's not so easy for the problem that it creates, which is to not always feel so inspired. But certain situations definitely support it, like what we're going to see from the end of March to the end of June in 2020. It's going to be about the best situation possible, at least for getting the higher spiritual lessons. And that means Jupiter is not only going to be joined Saturn, which is the ruler, which is one of the best situations for a debilitated planet that you can have, one of the strongest Nichabanga factors is joined its ruler. One of the other ones is joined an exalted planet. So for the first month and a half, from the time Jupiter enters, like March 29th until May 5th, I think it is, early May, it'll also be joined an exalted Mars. So you'll have Jupiter in Capricorn with Saturn, the ruler, and exalted Mars for almost half the transit. So this is, again, very supportive of the problem that Jupiter has when it's in Capricorn. And again, the problem is simply that we're not so hopeful and so inspired, which is the feeling that Jupiter wants. Jupiter is the preacher and the one that's connecting us to higher wisdom. So, of course, he wants to feel inspired. He goes into Capricorn. It's like, well, now I'm not feeling so inspired. Now I'm the priest, and I have to do it in a factory. So, okay, the priest does it in a factory, or maybe a prison. How many people find God in prisons, right? How many people in a prison inspire others, or in a factory inspire others, or whatever? You can do it anywhere. Jupiter can operate anywhere. It's just that the feeling isn't so natural, doesn't flow so easily. But if Saturn is there, who is like the one who is running the factory, well, then maybe you're the priest, but the owner of the factory says, oh, we got a priest here. Okay, we're going to give him some support because we see how much he can bring to the factory workers or something, and he can be a leader or a guide. And he can be inspiring to others because Saturn is there, who is the one that owns it. Saturn owns Capricorn, so he owns the factory. And so he's there the whole time. If not, then the priest is in the factory and he doesn't have there's no support. So the ruler gives support. Not only that, but then Mars is there, who is the most powerful, arguably, because he's exalted in Capricorn. Mars is there. So not only is the owner of the factory, say, there, but then the one who puts all of the energy in motion, like let's say the foreman, the one who is like the manager, the general manager of the factory, the one who, again, because Mars is like the general. Mars is the one that gets everything in order and says, okay, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, action. He's also there. So then it's like the owner of the factory, which is Saturn, hooks Jupiter, the priest, up with the foreman, the one who puts all the orders in motion. So now Jupiter's advice and counsel and inspiration is also now connected with the one who is implementing all the marching orders, which is Mars, right? So it's this kind of analogy. Now again, he's still in the factory. The teachings aren't maybe landing on the exact audience because, again, the priest likes to be in the church because people come to the church to hear the teachings. So that's where it feels better. That's where it flows easily. But there's still, the people in the factory still need some guidance. They need hope and all of that stuff. So again, think of this analogy a little bit as where we're at here in March, end of March 2020 through the end of June, and you could see maybe it's not a factory, maybe it's a hospital, because you could definitely see where Capricorn and this Saturn energy is also things like hospitals, places where we got to work hard, we got to concentrate, and we got to focus, and we got to hold things together and produce a result, like saving people's lives or something like that. So we have Saturn and Mars there, which shows, again, it's like if you say the owner of the hospital or the bureaucracy that keeps it together, and then Mars is saying, okay, we're going to fight hard. We have the courage to go in there and do it. And then Jupiter is also there, which is good teachings, good advice, good counsel. So the situations that are empowered in this current scenario, as I record this at the end of March 2020, the situation that we find ourselves in, which is having to dig out of this virus and try to prevent as much death as possible. We couldn't have a better situation, because it's Saturn and Mars are the two planets that make us work our butt off to fix the situation. Saturn says, I'm not going to give up just because it's hard. And Mars says, I have the courage to go in there where it's dangerous. And now Jupiter comes in and says, and here's the best advice we can have. Here is the teachings and the guidance. And again, it's not just religious or spiritual. It's actually good counsel, however you define it. If it's medical, it's good medical counsel. We'll start to see some of the disarray replaced by good advice, by good counsel, as much as we can, right, in that situation. And again, the entire transit is a little complicated, because then after early May, Mars moves on, and then as we get into around the end of May, both Jupiter and Mars go retrograde. Middle of May, end of May, Jupiter and Saturn, both go retrograde. That's a little trickier when you have them both retrograde and in Capricorn. But for the most part, this is how we can see the overall trend. By the way, the other planet that brings power and assistance and the willingness to work hard is the Sun. And the Sun is going to be exalted in the middle of April. This is why I said, and I have said repeatedly, that going into something like this, we couldn't ask for better astrological factors, because the things that help us beat back and destroy and win a war are aligned, which are Saturn, Mars, and also the Sun comes in to bring purification and light. We also have Venus, the nurse, who is the one who wants to care for everyone and care for everything, in Taurus for 4 months. It entered Taurus the end of April, and it's there until early August. Venus is the ruler of Taurus. So that's very powerful. Again, Jupiter will be in its debility, but it's still Jupiter, which is bringing good counsel, and it's joined its ruler, which is the powerful. But, again, it's like joined the owner of the factory or the one who runs the hospital, and joined Mars, which is like the factory foreman, or like the one in the hospital who makes all the decisions about how things get done. There will be good counsel. There will also be benevolence and grace flowing. No matter what the dignity, Jupiter still brings benevolence and grace everywhere he goes, and just as much. There's no less grace with Jupiter in Capricorn than Jupiter in Sagittarius. You want to understand these planets themselves, their nature is the divine force that it activates and that it rules. The dignity just shows what I just explained. It just shows how in certain environments that nature has a harder time expressing itself. By nature. So again, by nature, when Jupiter is in Capricorn, it feels like the priest is sort of in the factory. But if the factory worker if the owner is there, or you have an exalted planet there like Mars, then you hook it up with the power that's there, and it can make for great results, like taking those teachings and those philosophies and putting them into practice, being humble, being grateful, being gracious, being generous, staying inspired in the midst of difficulty. These are some of the great spiritual virtues and virtues of Saturn, or of Jupiter in Capricorn. Is you'll see people will have a great resilience, and they don't expect that everything is just going to be easy and inspiring all the time, which is one of the real problems with the spiritual path. One of the problems with authentic spirituality is people always need to feel good, and everything is done to feel good. Some emotional high. Oh, I feel good. And they mistake all that feeling good for being spiritual. It's not. That's just emotions. It's just an emotional roller coaster. Again, you don't ignore that, because generally the things that feel good to us, especially deep, on a very deep level, lead us to a spiritual truth. But authentic spirituality is not about some emotion. In fact, it often requires us to sacrifice how we feel in the moment, because we know that our our growth and our awakening from illusion is going to have some effort, and it's going to be kind of hard because we have to transform our ego, shatter our own illusions, destroy our misconceptions. These are all things related to Saturn and Mars. So, inasmuch as we can look at Jupiter in Capricorn and go, oh, but it's going to be debilitated, it's with Saturn and Mars, what is that? You never want to look at just debility without looking at all of the Nichabanga factors. By the way, another Nichabanga factor is retrograde. So I'll do another video about that as we get closer to it, but I'm recording this now right on the cusp of Jupiter about to go into Sagittarius for the next 3 months, and I wanted to first give an overview of this conceptually. First Jupiter in Capricorn, and then Jupiter in Capricorn with Saturn and with Mars, so you get an idea of what we're talking about. So it's not just a jumble of 3 things. What does it mean? You have to separate each thing. And this is how you learn astrology correctly. You do it correctly. You don't just say, it's going to be hard, but not that hard, and good and bad, and all these. You just break it down. And often one of the easiest ways is to connect it like with a story or with sort of characters and places. It makes a lot of sense that way. So if you like this video, share it with others. I hope you enjoyed this, and I enjoyed making it for you. So take care.